Could the Great Flood of Nova be not originally from the Bible, but was from Sumerian folklore? In 1853, the archaeologists Hormizd Rassam and Austin Henry Laird found cuneiform tablets written in Akkadian in the ruins of the library of King Ashurbanipal, and those cuneiform tablets included the poems about Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk, and his servant Enkidu. Later in the British Museum, George Smith translated the first cuneiform tablet, which was named the Flood Tablet. To Smith's astonishment, the poem was almost similar to the Great Flood of Nova. The Flood Tablet was a Sumerian poem which was written between 1300 BCE 1000 BCE, and that's 600 years before the Old Testament was written. The tale revolves around a legendary hero named Gilgamesh, who was said to be the king of the Sumerian city of Uruk. His father is identified as Lugalbanda, king of Uruk, and his mother is the wise cow goddess Ninsun. No contemporary information is known about Gilgamesh, who, if he was in fact an historical person, would have lived around 2700 BC, nor is there any preserved early 3rd millennium version of the poem. During the 21st century BC, Shulgi, ruler of the Sumerian city of Ur, was a patron of the literary arts. He sponsored a revival of older literature and established academies of scholars at his capital Ur and at the holy city of Nippur. Shulgi claimed Lugalbanda as his father and Gilgamesh as his brother. There were 5 more cuneiform tablets of Gilgamesh poems, which was written in the era of 200 BCE 1500 BCE. Gilgamesh and Akka describes the triumph of the hero over his overlord Akka, ruler of the city of Kish. Gilgamesh and Huwawa recounts the journey of the hero and his servant Enkidu to the Cedar Mountains, where they encounter and slay the giant Huwawa, the guardian of the forest. A third tale, Gilgamesh and the Bull of Heaven, deals with Gilgamesh's rejection of the amorous advances made by Inanna, the Queen of Heaven. Seeking revenge, the goddess sends the Bull of Heaven to kill Gilgamesh, but the hero, with the assistance of Enkidu, slays the monster. In Gilgamesh and the Netherworld, the hero loses 2 sport-related objects, which fall into the netherworld. Enkidu descends into the depths to find them, and, upon his return to life, describes the horrid fate that awaits the dead. In the final composition, The Death of Gilgamesh, the hero dreams that the gods are meeting to review his exploits and accomplishments. They decide that he, like all of humankind, shall not be granted eternal life. As per the story of the Flood Tablet, after the death of his companion and friend Enkidu, Gilgamesh decides not to share the same fate of a mortal life. He goes on looking for Ushnapishtim and his wife, the only humans to have survived the Great Flood, and who were granted immortality by the gods, in the hope of discovering the secret of everlasting life. The ageless Utnapishtim and his wife now reside in a beautiful country in another world, Dilmun, and Gilgamesh travels far to the east in search of them. Eventually, he comes to the twin peaks of Mount Mashu at the end of the earth, from where the sun rises from the other world, the gate of which is guarded by 2 terrible scorpion beings. They allow Gilgamesh to proceed when he convinces them of his divinity in his desperation, and he travels for 12 leagues through the dark tunnel where the sun travels every night. The world at the end of the tunnel is a bright wonderland full of trees with leaves of jewels. There he meets Siduri, the winemaker, who initially believes he is a murderer from his disheveled appearance and attempts to dissuade him from his quest, but eventually she sends him to Urshanabi, the ferryman who must help him cross the sea to the island where Utnapishtim lives, navigating the waters of death, of which the slightest touch means instant death. When he meets Urshanabi, though, he appears to be surrounded by a company of stone giants, which Gilgamesh promptly kills, thinking them to be hostile. He tells the ferryman his story and asks for his help, but Urshanabi explains that he has just destroyed the sacred stones, which allow the ferry boat to safely cross the waters of death. The only way they can now cross is if Gilgamesh cuts 120 trees and fashions them into punting poles, so that they can cross the waters by using a new pole each time, and by using his garment as a sail. Finally, they reach the island of Dilmun, and when Utnapishtim sees that there is someone else in the boat, he asks Gilgamesh who he is. Gilgamesh tells him his story and asks for help. First, he rejects his request. When Gilgamesh asks what's the difference between their situations, Utnapishtim recounts how a great storm and flood was brought to the world by the god Enlil, who wanted to destroy all of mankind for the noise and confusion they brought to the world. But the god forewarned Utnapishtim, advising him to build a ship in readiness, and to load onto it his treasures, his family and the seeds of all living things. The rains came as promised, and the whole world was covered with water, killing everything except Utnapishtim and his boat. The boat came to rest on the tip of the mountain of Nisr, where they waited for the waters to subside, releasing first a dove, then a swallow, and then a raven to check for dry land. Utnapishtim then made sacrifices and libations to the gods, and although Enlil was angry that someone had survived his flood, he advised him to make his peace. So Enlil blessed Utnapishtim and his wife, and granted them everlasting life, and took them to live in the land of the gods on the island of Dilmun. Now, this story is much older than of the Nova and the Great Flood, and probably the Old Testament authors got the story from Sumerian folklore. And did you notice the island of Dilmun? A bright wonderland full of trees with leaves of jewels. Sounds much like the paradise of Adam and Eve, and also this paradise has a couple too, Ushnapishtim and his wife. However, despite his reservations about why the gods should give him the same honor as himself, the hero of the flood, Utnapishtim, does reluctantly decide to offer Gilgamesh a chance for immortality. First, though, he challenges Gilgamesh to stay awake for 6 days and 7 nights. But Gilgamesh falls asleep almost before Utnapishtim finishes speaking. When he awakes after 7 days of sleep, Utnapishtim ridicules his failure and sends him back to Uruk, along with the ferryman Urshanabi in exile. As they leave, though, Utnapishtim's wife asks her husband to have mercy on Gilgamesh for his long journey, and so he tells Gilgamesh of a plant that grows at the very bottom of the ocean that will make him young again. Gilgamesh obtains the plant by binding stones to his feet to allow him to walk on the bottom of the sea. He plans to use the flower to rejuvenate the old men of the city of Uruk, and then to use it himself. Unfortunately, he places the plant on the shore of a lake while he bathes, and it is stolen by a serpent, which loses its old skin, and is thus reborn. Gilgamesh weeps at having failed at both opportunities to obtain immortality, and he disconsolately returns to the massive walls of his own city of Uruk. In time, Gilgamesh too dies, and the people of Uruk mourn his passing, knowing that they will never see his like again. The 12th tablet, which is often appended as a kind of sequel to the original 11, was most probably added at a later date, and seems to bear little relation to the well-crafted and finished 11-tablet epic. It is actually a near copy of an earlier tale, in which Gilgamesh sends Enkidu to retrieve some objects of his from the underworld, but Enkidu dies and returns in the form of a spirit to relate the nature of the underworld to Gilgamesh. Enkidu's pessimistic description of the underworld in this tablet is the oldest such description known. Gilgamesh might actually have been a real ruler in the late early dynastic II period, a contemporary of Aga, king of Kish. The discovery of artifacts dating back to around 2600 BCE associated with Enmebaragesi of Kish, who is mentioned in the legends as the father of one of Gilgamesh's adversaries, has lent credibility to the historical existence of Gilgamesh. In Sumerian king lists, Gilgamesh is noted as the fifth king ruling after the flood.